Good afternoon and welcome to the Cassandra Voices podcast. I have here with me today Des Traynor, whose essay On the Money explores the idea that the Protestant work ethic is nothing but a neat trick to get some people to slave their guts out for others' profits. Thank you for joining us, Des.
You're welcome.
A first question for you. What do you mean by that statement about the Protestant work ethic being a neat trick?
Well, we associate our self-value or self-worth with our productivity or being able to work, which was something that kind of, I think, originated with Calvin and then was bolstered by Adam Smith. But it's kind of demonstrable that a lot of people are not, the whole idea was that if you work hard you will be rewarded and you'll reap the benefits, but it seems kind of obvious now that a lot of people are not reaping the benefits and are just keeping their head above water or are working in order to just get by. So I would kind of equate that with being duped to a certain extent.
And what about self-discipline? Is that important in any endeavour? For example, as a musician, it's not purely about
absolutely
making money.
But that's like about having a vocation, and it's also in a way about working for yourself or managing yourself, and also, I mean, anyone who works in the arts, well, we could get into the whole discussion about commodification and people making art in order to fill the gap in the market or whatever, but most of the best art is made without fear of consequence, and certainly not with the profit motive uppermost in mind.
So there's nothing wrong with hard work in and of itself, but when it's simply directed at or for where.
Well, it's more to do with exploitation, I think.
Okay.
Talking about. And I think there are a lot of people who are exploited who don't even realise they're being exploited.
Now, relating to that exploitation, you point to the way in which people are obliged to sell themselves with fake statements on sites like LinkedIn about their life goals. I'm wondering, is there a more authentic way of seeking work, of putting yourself out there, as they put it?
Well, what do you think? I think maybe self-employment is a way. I mean, depending what field you're in, it's got to do with the extent to which you can be honest or not. I mean, LinkedIn and finding a job, like we're always told, it's about selling yourself. So it's really kind of a charade between a potential employee and an employer, and they're playing this kind of dancing out this game of please hire me and I'll be the best employee you ever had, and I'll work so hard. And, a more authentic way of doing it, well, I don't know. Suppose you're being interviewed to do data entry on a computer, and you've kind of got to make it look like it's the only job you've ever wanted to do, and you're passionate about it. Whereas, if you answered the question honestly, you'd say, well, I just need the money.
And I suppose that relates to another thinker you refer to in your essay, who David Graeber, who sadly died a year or two ago, and his book on bullshit jobs, and so in a sense, are people applying for jobs that are of very little worth to society in an inauthentic way? Is that?
Yeah, and it's ultimately corroding for themselves, I think. I mean, Graeber, he estimates that 60% of societal jobs are fairly useless, which, it would require a massive turnaround in how societies run. But I mean, the idea that we have to have full employment, and then that's one of the indicators of a healthy economy, has to be questioned, I think, because, a lot of jobs we don't need.
Do you think that in in ideal conditions, we would be able to roll out of bed in the morning at whatever time we liked and simply go down to the local library, or go to our guitar lesson or whatever it is.
Well,
Do you think that people would be motivated, or do some people need, that kind of kick
carrot
up the
and
back,
stick.
kick up the backside?
Well, what is being a student like for 4 or 5 or 6 years, except loafing, as your friend Barry calls it? I suppose there's a difference between loafing and leisure. Loafing implies doing nothing. Leisure implies that you know how to fill your free time,
Okay.
which I guess has to do with education and, motivation. I mean, speaking personally, lockdown was a revelation for me because, it wasn't that I rolled out of bed whenever I felt like it, but, I was able to read and write and watch films and listen to music and play guitar and, which, if you're working, that takes a large chunk out of your day, just time-wise. Of course, some people would need to be motivated, or some people would not know what to do if they suddenly had a lot of free time on their hands. But I don't think that's necessarily their fault. It's like what we were talking about before we went on air about, contemplation being one of the highest goods in society. There's an awful lot of people very stressed and very worried and paying mortgages and rent and all that kind of thing. And, we're kind of made for something better in a way, because, life is short.
I recall one left-wing politician telling me that he met a senior Fine Gael politician at one point in Dáil Éireann, who said to him, well, we wouldn't want to raise the rate of social welfare too much, otherwise people would sit around in their boxer shorts, looking at pornography and eating crisps.
Which is we were sitting around, I don't know that we were sitting around in our boxer shorts, but we were, that's what we were doing during lockdown, wasn't it? And it seemed to work, whether it was sustainable or not is another question.
So you don't think that it would, we'll perhaps address it again later, but this idea of universal basic income, it wouldn't lead to untold decadence, would it, or excess?
Well, there's a certain amount of utopian thinking in the essay that I wrote, but I don't think that if universal basic income, universal, if everybody had access to it, I don't necessarily think everyone would take it up. So you have a certain amount of the population working because they want to work, and you have another proportion of the population, availing of the freeing up of time that it would allow them. And I mean, even in the current government, there's plans to introduce basic income for artists. I think there's been 9,000 applications for €325 a week. But there's 2,000 places, so there's a 22% chance of being successful. I've applied for it,
Yeah, good. Going back to the content of your essay, one of the numerous sources you allude to is Michel de Montaigne, the great French essayist of the 17th century. Mm-hmm. Who appears to have had a contradictory relationship with idleness. He retired to his country estate and yet complained about it.
At the age of 38 because he thought he was getting old and he didn't have much time left.
So I wonder, can an idler paradoxically, like Michel de Montaigne, be more productive than someone who busies themselves with tasks all day long?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, I don't think Montaigne actually reconciled that in his head, but, he made a decision to have more free time in order to be able to write. And writing is not just the time spent at your desk, it's, what you're thinking about when you're preparing the dinner or walking around, things come up. And if you are, he was a diplomat before he retired to his country estate, so he was very caught up in day-to-day affairs, and I imagine that he would have thought, well, if I keep on doing this, I'm not going to be able to write the essays I want to write, And I think, coming back to the earlier question, and it's relevant to this as well, I mean, with the basic income for artists, I think there's a danger in kind of overlaying artists with the idea of free money, or that, you know, artists should have, you know, a handout. Whereas, I mean, I think it should be available to everybody, really. And it also kind of, it's a kind of a residue of the idea that, well, that artists are kind of feckless or a bit lazy or something, you know, which, you know, I don't think is true, because people are productive, you know. It's just that it can be difficult to sell your work or to make a living or to get by doing it, you know?
Yeah. It does seem to be a slightly elitist kind of label almost, to be an artist, you know. In an ideal society, shouldn't we all be to some degree artists? Creative.
Yeah.
And my issue with that is it sort of distracts attention from the more basic problems of the cost of living. And I think if we were addressing that as a society, it would be better for the arts, rather than, you know, hiving off the artists in their sort of you know, the equivalent of
well, that they need it more than anyone else. So.
And it almost sets them apart from society. Now, I think there are, for example, in France, there's a scheme whereby musicians can avail
you get a payment when you're not working.
Avail of a grant when they reach a threshold of income, which shows that they are sort of engaging with an audience and I suppose connecting with some people. So in a way, maybe there's particularly in the musical field, which has been really affected by the internet, and you know, where people are not buying CDs and records as they used to, and maybe they're going to concerts to some extent, but it's particularly challenging for musicians.
Yeah, well, all musicians have to tour now, really, to make a living. And it's not just the concert ticket sales, it's the merch, as they call it, that kind of keeps the show on the road, as far as I can see. But yeah, I know some people who work in the film industry in France, and, like, you know, they'll work on a film, and then if they're not working, there's a fund available, a state fund, that they can live on between jobs, which is not like, you know, signing on the dole.
Yeah. Another source you refer to is Herman Melville's short story, Bartleby the Scrivener.
Bartleby the Scrivener, yes.
Can you tell us a little?
Well, it's by Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, and it's a short story. And yeah, Bartleby is hired as a scrivener, which is pretty much a clerk, or, you know, probably just the kind of job that would be done by a photocopier now, copying documents in a lawyer's office. And for a while he's a model worker, and then one day he takes it into his head to tell his employer that he would prefer not to do whatever task he's been asked. And of course this escalates, and, you know, they keep giving him chances, and eventually he loses his job, and his former employer tries to rescue him from being down and out and all the rest, but he kind of won't go back to work, and eventually he dies of, you know, poverty or hunger or whatever. But it's kind of, you know, it can be read as a classic example of, you know, Marxist alienation.
Okay.
He's alienated from his, you know, what he does for a livelihood, and can't do it anymore, essentially.
So, but could it also be seen as a kind of parable about, you know, failing to live up to the ideal of the work ethic?
Well, absolutely, yeah. And it's someone who's, well, they're essentially placed outside society because of that. You know?
But does that make him an exceptional person, or is that what the story is saying? Is it that he's unusual?
Well, it's more like, you know, why do some people get to lead lives of leisure and why do others not? I mean, it's kind of got to do with inequality, and maybe, you know, people get inheritances, or they're, you know, born into well-to-do circumstances. And people will say, well, that's just, you know, that's life, or life isn't fair, or that's just good luck or bad luck or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as though, I mean, if you'd offered Bartleby the same amount of salary as to do, to do nothing as to go to the Scrivener's office, he surely would have taken it, you know.
Moving on then to Oscar Wilde's contention that manual labour is degrading, and
well, it's not really just, it's not any manual labour. He specifically cites the example of sweeping a crossroads in, you know, sub-zero temperatures with snow in the winter, and he says it's impossible to do this job with dignity and that we're made for something better. I mean, I wouldn't be snobbish or looking down on manual labour. I like doing the garden, you know. I like exercise. Again, it's kind of like who gets to do the worst jobs and who gets time off to, you know, write essays like The Soul of Man Under Socialism, you know. And yeah, Wilde's argument essentially is that we're made for something better as well. And he goes on, which is in the essay, which is quite a long essay, but very interesting, quite formative for me, that, you know, all kind of major civilizations have depended on slavery, whether it was Greece or Rome or the United States, but that, you know, slavery is immoral and inhumane, so all, you know, boring or repetitive jobs should be done by machines, and that would, you know, we can make slaves of machines, which would be more ethical. But of course, you know, Wilde, or indeed Russell, who I talk about as well, didn't, again, their thinking was kind of utopian, because new technology has pretty much been co-opted by capitalism. What was supposed to make all our lives easier is very often just making it harder.
yeah, I mean, isn't it a great paradox that all these labour-saving devices, or what were supposed to be labour-saving devices, haven't resulted in us working less?
Yeah,
But in us being, as you point out, always on call.
And if you save time at work by, you know, getting a machine to do something, then you're expected to fill the free time with doing something else, you know, which oftentimes, again, it's back to bullshit jobs, amounts to looking like you're doing something as opposed to, you know, doing anything really productive.
And the moral sort of idea that the devil makes work for idle hands.
Yeah, well, that's like
coming
that's pure Calvinism, isn't it?
From Calvin. You seem a bit pessimistic about the possibility that technology could radically improve our lives, even in socialist circumstances. Are there limits even within a more sort of socialist framework? You talk about kind of the sort of problem of sort of the environment and energy requirements for machines, for example. Mm-hmm. You know, is there really no kind of optimum solution? Are we always going to have to?
Well, we'd have to have a socialist government first to see, wouldn't we? If there's pessimism, it's more kind of pessimism about that kind of society being operable again. I mean, I think there's probably more hope in Ireland than there is in a lot of other places, particularly the rest of the Anglosphere.
Why do you think there's hope in Ireland?
Because I think that younger people, especially under 30s, are beginning to, you know, they're beginning to say that they've had enough, or that, you know, the reason that they can't buy houses or that they're paying extortionate rents is because of the old guys and the old system and the people who've been in power for years.
Where do you see change coming from in Ireland?
Well, if you're to believe the opinion polls, Sinn Fein are doing quite healthily, and whether they'd be able to form a working government with the other left-wing parties is debatable, or it's we don't know. But I think there'll certainly be a stronger left-wing representation in the Dáil next time round.
Do you think that the left-wing parties will be disappointed with Sinn Féin, or do you think that they're a genuinely left-wing party? Or we've split.
I don't know, but
through the history of Northern Ireland, we've seen the split between the provisional movement and the official movement, which was more of an internationalist working class kind of idea.
Yeah, I don't think Sinn Féin are perfect, but maybe they will mess up, but the kind of scaremongering that's going on, every kind of second article in the Irish Times is about how the sky is going to fall down and the apocalypse will arrive if Sinn Féin are elected. And it's not. The economy would be run differently. That's what would happen, and it wouldn't suit the people it suits now. I don't know. I don't think Sinn Féin are perfect, but I'd prefer to give them a chance.
Where do you see the imperfections?
They seem to be quite different parties, north and south of the border. And there's some kind of, I don't know, there seem to be some anomalies there. But I've no problem with the, aspiration to a united Ireland. And, they call themselves a socialist party. Their policies on housing and education and health would all seem to indicate that. So, we'll see. And then, where do we start? Computers. We'll see what happens to computers then. Yeah.
So, we're also. You also discuss entrepreneurship, and you're not dismissive of it. You're not a kind of a doctrinaire sort of communist on that subject. But you see. You think that entrepreneurs should be treated as only in the same way as other members of society?
I think entrepreneurship is a talent, like any other kind of talent, whether it's for writing or music or, law or whatever. But it's just, why do people become entrepreneurs? Is it because they have a particular product that they think is great, or is it, is it solely to make money? What is the talent? The talent is being good at making money. So to kind of reorder things so that entrepreneurs got paid pretty much the same, or paid themselves the same as, teachers or nurses or whatever, would require quite a shift. I think entrepreneurs should be rewarded, but not to the extent that they are. And there's a whole kind of lauding of entrepreneurship in.
But you have another idea for, rather than them being allowed to keep their billions, you have another idea, don't you?
Radical redistribution.
Wasn't there a particular award that entrepreneurs could win? And
if you got to 1 billion or 10 billion, you could get a trophy. Congratulations, you've won capitalism. Maybe it's a good idea to spend more time with the family now. But of course, I also point out that the problem there would be the competitive streak, in that, maybe a very successful entrepreneur just wants to be richer than the next guy, because it's a race or a competition. But it seems to me, what are you going to do with more than 10 billion?
Okay, so now moving on then to, because it's a very wide-ranging essay. You also discuss democracy, and quote Flaubert, who believed that democracy will give way to a better form of government. If so, what would that look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, he didn't know, and I don't know either. But his statement was that, it's foolish for us to think that democracy is the last word in social organisation or governance. And like I say, democracy, for all its flaws, which are becoming more and more apparent every day, like, influence of data on elections and all that kind of
Social
thing.
media manipulation.
Yeah. But it's the best we've come up with so far. But Flaubert was right when he said that it's foolish to think it's the last word, because could people who were living under feudalism and the divine right of kings imagine democracy? I don't know what's next, but I think that democracy is kind of broken and needs to be fixed.
Okay, and just a final question about how you express admiration for European style the sort of European style social market economy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular country which you think has struck the right balance between socialism and capitalism, allowing people to have the kind of space to flourish as individuals?
Well, I'm kind of concerned with everyday things like, fair rents and access to health care, etc. It certainly seems easier to live day to day in Germany or France or Spain or Holland or Denmark because, you don't see homeless people on every street corner. And they have efficient public health services that are financed through taxation, but they're accessible to everybody. But of course, the paradox is that these countries are all colonizers, so we know where a lot of their wealth came from. And also there's a lurch to the right in some of those countries as well. But I don't know, Finland seems like to have a fairly progressive model that works. Norway obviously, but then they have they're bankrolled by their oil stocks. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if you've lived in continental Europe, but there might be a greater level of bureaucracy. But there's also day-to-day simple things like getting a doctor's appointment or getting into a hospital if you need an operation are a lot more straightforward than the kind of rigmarole we have here. I mean, there's probably no greater example of inequality in Irish society than the fact that 50% of people have health insurance and 50% don't, And if you don't have insurance and you need an operation, you're pretty much up shit creek. You have to wait for 2 or 3 or 4 years.
So, in summary, you are on one level pessimistic about Ireland. Well, not pessimistic, but you see a huge amount of problems with the country. But on the other hand, you're optimistic that things are going to get better.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not like, a political pundit really, and I'm certainly not a prophet. I would see more hope here than for Britain or for the United States, because I don't think it matters who gets elected in the United States, and in Britain, the 40% of the population are going to vote Tory no matter what, So I don't really see a chance, and even the whole kind of anti-Corbyn thing, who seemed to me to have quite reasonable socialist policies, but all the smears and the anti-Semitism, etc., etc. I think in Ireland, the old guys are the guys who are trying to reinvent themselves. I think they know that they're not going to have it all their own way.
Well, interesting you refer to Corbyn and the smears, sort of this Corbyn being an anti-Semite, which was completely ridiculous, charge being laid against him. Can you see that tactic being used against Sinn Fein in some way?
Well, the whole the D4 kind of disdain or nervousness about Sinn Fein always amuses me because it usually amounts to the violent past, but that seems to me to just be how far back do you want to go, because the established parties had violent past as well, and also it kind of it goes into lots of other arguments, like Frantz Fanon and when is it right to use force in a colonial situation, etc., etc.
Yeah. Okay, we'll wind up proceedings then. Thanks, Des, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we can do this again. Thanks again.
Yeah, that'll be good with the next essay. Thanks, Frank.